I didn't mean for silence to hurt them. But that last message from my mom broke something in me. It wasn't the words, exactly. It was the way they turned cold after everything I'd done. I'd bought that house so they'd finally have peace. No rent, no fear. And yet, when they started fighting about who deserved more, I left the family group chat and swore I'd never look back. Months passed and not a single call. Then one evening I got a message from my brother. "We need you. The bank's taking the house." My stomach dropped. The same house they said I didn't really own. The same family that accused me of holding power over them. I stared at the message, wondering how everything flipped so fast. Did they really lose it all? Or was this another guilt trip? Either way, the silence I'd built was cracking. Would you pick up that call? Would you save the people who never said thank you? Or would you let the house and the history collapse on its own? Leah didn't reply right away. She stared at the words, letting them echo inside her chest like an unanswered knock. The bank's taking the house. It didn't make sense. She'd paid for it in full. Every cent accounted for. How could they lose something that was never in their name? Then it hit her. Mark must have refinanced it behind her back. He'd done it once before with his truck loan. She pressed her palms against her temples, the betrayal burning through her pulse. She thought of the night she'd left the group chat, the shouting, the endless blame, her father's voice saying, "You wouldn't even have money if it weren't for this family." Now that same family wanted her to save them again. The irony twisted in her chest. Her silence had been her only boundary, and now it was being tested. Was she ready to speak again, even if every word reopened an old wound? By afternoon, Leah's phone was still silent. No one had followed up, not her brother, not her parents. The longer she waited, the more her anger mixed with guilt. She knew what losing that house meant to them. It was where birthdays were celebrated, where her mother planted roses every spring. But it was also the house that broke her, the place of whispered debts and slammed doors. She opened her old photos folder, scrolling past smiling faces that no longer called her name. Each picture felt like a lie, proof that happiness had been borrowed, not built. She thought about calling Eli, but her hand froze. She wanted to hear remorse, not desperation. She wanted them to say sorry before please. Yet deep down she knew families rarely apologized. They just returned when they needed saving. That evening, Leah called the mortgage office, pretending to be just a relative asking questions. What she learned made her chest tighten. Her father had taken out a second loan, using the house as collateral. 2 months after, she'd transferred the deed. He'd lied on the paperwork, claimed ownership. It wasn't just bad judgment, it was fraud. And somehow, the payments had stopped completely. Leah ended the call and sat in silence, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream. He wanted to scream, to call him and demand why. But then she imagined Nora's trembling voice, Eli's panic, the familiar guilt waiting behind every ring. That house wasn't just walls, it was the last thread connecting them. And now, it was unraveling fast. That night, Leah stepped outside for the first time in days. The cold air bit at her skin, but it grounded her. She thought about how many times she'd been the fixer, the daughter who paid, explained, and forgave. Maybe this time she didn't have to. Maybe letting the house go was the only way to set them all free. But then she saw the message again, glowing faintly on her lock screen. "We need you." She knew those 3 words had built her whole childhood. Need, not love. Every crisis brought her closer, and every piece pushed her away. The house had become their lifeline, and now it was drowning them. She whispered to the night, "Maybe I can't save them. Not this time." But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She already knew she would try. Leah hadn't planned to go back. but sleepless nights have a way of eroding resolve. By the third one, she was already in her car. The familiar road winding toward the house she swore she'd never see again. The closer she got, the smaller she felt. Every bend carried ghosts, laughter from the back seat, her mother's songs, her father's lectures about family loyalty. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, unsure if she was driving toward healing or another heartbreak. When the house came into view, her breath caught. The paint was peeling, the porch sagging, the once bright garden now a patch of wilted soil. It didn't look like home anymore. It looked like the aftermath of promises no one kept. As she parked by the curb, the lights flicked on inside. They were waiting. And suddenly, every mile she'd driven felt like a mistake. When Leah stepped onto the porch, the door creaked open before she could knock. Nora stood there, eyes red and tired, wearing the same cardigan Leah remembered from years ago. No words came at first. Just silence thick with years of hurt. Then Nora whispered, "I didn't know what else to do." It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough to make Leah's throat tighten. Inside, everything felt smaller. The framed photos, the ticking clock, the faint smell of cinnamon, unchanged yet unfamiliar. Eli appeared from the kitchen, face pale, guilt written all over him. "Dad's not here," he said softly. "He's trying to fix things." Leah's jaw clenched. Fixing things was his favorite lie. She dropped her bag by the couch and finally spoke. "Then tell me exactly what he broke this time." Eli handed her a stack of papers. "He took another loan," he said, voice cracking. Leah scanned the numbers. Interest rates, overdue notices, forged signatures. Her name was there, faint but clear. "He used my signature," she whispered. Eli nodded, shame painting his face. "He said he'd pay it back before you found out." Leah felt her pulse spike. Years of sacrifice, all undone by one desperate act. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the fact that she wasn't even surprised. Her mind flooded with memories of her father's charm, his excuses, the way he always turned guilt into gratitude. Maybe this time, she thought, he'd finally gone too far. The front door opened sharply. Mark walked in. His gray hair was uncombed, his eyes bloodshot, his steps unsteady. "You shouldn't have come," he muttered, setting down a stack of envelopes. Leah's anger flared. "You forged my name," she said, her voice trembling but loud. Mark sighed, the way people do when they think they're above consequence. "I did what I had to. This family needed me to hold it together." Leah laughed bitterly. "You held it together by stealing from it." Nora covered her mouth, tears breaking through. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mark looked at Leah, his voice cracking for the first time, and said, "You'll never understand what it's like to lose everything." She stared at him, eyes sharp. "You're right," she whispered. "Because I built everything you lost." The argument stretched deep into the night. Words turned into wounds, and every truth spilled felt heavier than the last. By the time silence returned, Leah sat on the porch alone, her breath visible in the cool air. The house behind her felt haunted by debt, by denial, by love that had forgotten how to be kind. She thought of the child she once was, standing on this same porch, believing her family would always be her safe place. But safety, she realized, was something you build, not something you inherit. She looked back at the house one last time, its lights flickering softly. Tomorrow, she'd call the lawyer. Tomorrow, she'd decide if saving them meant saving herself, or finally letting go. For the first time in months, she didn't feel guilty, just tired and strangely free. Leah woke before dawn, the kind of early that feels more like an ending than a beginning. She couldn't shake the weight pressing on her chest. The night before still echoed in her head. Her father's voice, brittle and defensive, her mother's quiet sobs. For a moment she almost called her lawyer, but her hand stopped midair. What if saving the house meant destroying them completely? What if justice wasn't the same as peace? She looked around the living room, cluttered with memories. Family photos, old shoes by the door, the familiar smell of coffee brewing somewhere down the hall. It all felt smaller now, fragile. She realized this house wasn't just falling apart from the outside. It was rotting from years of silence and secrets, and she wasn't sure if she could be the one to rebuild it again. Nora found her in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs. For a while, neither spoke. Then Nora said softly, "He's scared, Leah. Not of losing the house. Of losing you." Leah didn't look up. "He already lost me," she whispered. Nora reached across the counter, her voice trembling. "You were the strong one." We leaned too hard on that. The words hit her harder than she expected. Maybe it wasn't just about betrayal. Maybe it was about a family that never learned balance, parents who depended, children who carried too much. Leah took a slow sip, feeling the warmth cut through the morning chill. She didn't forgive them, not yet, but for the first time she didn't feel like running either. Maybe staying, just for today, was its own kind of courage. Later that afternoon, Leah met Eli in the yard. He was fixing the broken fence, though the effort seemed more about guilt than repair. "I didn't know about the second loan," he said quietly. "But I should have." Leah nodded, not with anger, but with a tired kind of understanding. We all should have done something sooner. For years, she'd carried the illusion that strength meant silence. Now, watching her brother struggle to hammer in a crooked nail, she realized strength sometimes meant saying the truth out loud. "We can't keep saving him," she said. Eli looked up, eyes filled with guilt and a hint of relief. "Then what do we do?" Leah exhaled, steady this time. "We start saving us." When evening fell, Mark came home again. This time, quieter. He looked smaller, like a man stripped of all excuses. Leah didn't speak first. She wanted him to. He sat across from her at the table, hands trembling slightly. "I made a mess I can't clean," he admitted. The words hung there, fragile but real. Leah felt tears rise but didn't let them fall. "You hurt us, Dad," she said softly, "and I don't know how to trust you again." Mark nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then maybe trust starts with me not asking you to." For the first time, Leah saw him not as the father who failed her, but as a flawed man trying to face what he'd broken. It didn't fix everything, but it was something. That night, Leah stood outside again, the cold air brushing her face. The house behind her glowed gently, a little less haunted now. Tomorrow, she'd call the bank herself, figure out what could still be saved. Not because they deserved it, but because she finally understood that walking away didn't always mean freedom. Sometimes facing the ruins was how you rebuilt your peace. As the wind rustled the dead leaves, Leah smiled faintly. The house wasn't just a burden. It was proof that she could carry heavy things and still survive. She whispered to herself, "This time, I'm not saving them. I'm saving me." For the first time in years, the word home didn't sound like a lie. It sounded like a choice. The next morning, Leah drove into town with the folder of papers on the passenger seat. The streets were quiet, washed in pale winter light. She had an appointment with a lawyer, one she'd avoided for weeks. Every turn of the wheel felt like a choice between loyalty and self-respect. She didn't want revenge. She wanted release. But to reach it, she'd have to face what her father had done in full daylight. As she parked outside the brick office building, her hands trembled. She thought of her mother's voice that morning. "Do what you need to do, Leah. We'll still love you." For the first time, it sounded like permission, not pressure. She took a deep breath, grabbed the folder, and stepped out. Today wasn't about saving anyone. It was about ending the cycle that had kept her small. The lawyer, Ms. Reynolds, listened carefully as Leah explained everything. Every signature, Every lie, every promise that fell apart. When Leah finished, she waited for judgment, but the woman only nodded. "You're not just here to fix a house," Ms. Reynolds said gently. "You're here to protect your future." The words settled in Leah's chest like truth she'd always known but never said aloud. They discussed options. Legal actions, transfer forms, fraud reports. Each step sounded colder than the last, but necessary. Leah realized that standing up for herself didn't mean tearing her family apart. It meant drawing the line where love ended and self-respect began. When she left the office, the air felt lighter. For once, she wasn't drowning in their problems. She was walking toward her own peace. That evening, Leah returned home to find Nora sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in her old knitted shawl. "You went," Nora said softly. Leah nodded. "I had to." Nora didn't argue. She just looked at her with tired pride. "You did what I never could," she whispered. The words broke something gentle open inside Leah. Maybe love wasn't always about fixing things. Maybe it was about letting people learn from what they broke. Inside, the air felt different, quieter, safer. Eli was in the living room making notes from a budgeting app, something Leah never thought she'd see. Mark wasn't home yet, and maybe that was okay. They were finally learning to stand without him holding the frame. Leah looked around, realizing that the house, even in its brokenness, was still standing. Just like them. When Mark finally came home that night, he didn't shout or defend himself. He simply asked, "What happens now?" Leah met his eyes and said, "Whatever comes next, it's not my job to fix it." The words were steady, but kind. Well, Mark nodded slowly, his shoulders heavy with something close to remorse. "You grew stronger than me," he murmured. Leah's heart softened, but she didn't reply. Some truths didn't need answers, they just needed space. He walked past her into the kitchen, where Nora greeted him with quiet forgiveness. Leah stood in the hallway, listening to their hushed voices. For the first time, she didn't feel trapped between them. She felt apart from it, separate, but still connected. It wasn't the ending she expected, but maybe endings weren't supposed to be clean. Maybe they were just honest. The next morning, Leah packed her things. Not in anger, but in peace. She folded each shirt, each memory, and placed it in a suitcase like she was reclaiming pieces of herself. When she stepped outside, the air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain. The house stood behind her, still battered, still beautiful in its way. It wasn't her burden anymore. It was just a place she once saved and finally learned to leave. As she got into her car, her phone buzzed. A message from Eli. "Thank you for not giving up on us." She smiled faintly, eyes misting. "You're welcome," she whispered to herself, starting the engine. The road ahead stretched wide and open. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from her family. She was running toward her own life. 6 months later, Leah's life felt like a quiet kind of freedom. She'd moved into a small apartment by the river. 1 bedroom, creaky floors, and sunlight that painted her mornings gold. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. No noise, no guilt, no expectations. She paid her bills on time, cooked for herself, and slept through the night without checking her phone. Sometimes she missed them. The chaos, the noise, the way home used to feel like a storm you couldn't help running back to. But peace, she realized, wasn't loud. It was the sound of her own footsteps, echoing in a place she chose. She still kept a photo of the house on her dresser, not as a reminder of pain, but proof that love can survive even when it's broken. Because maybe family wasn't about staying. It was about learning when to step away and when to return. One evening, as the rain drummed softly against her window, her phone lit up. It was Eli. She hesitated, heart thudding, before answering. His voice was steadier now, gentler. "Dad started counseling," he said, "and Mom wanted me to tell you she misses you." Leah didn't speak at first. part of her still wanted to guard the peace she'd built, but another part, smaller yet stubborn, missed hearing their voices more than she wanted to admit. "Tell her I'm okay," Leah said finally, her voice soft. "Tell her I still love her." The line went quiet, and then Eli whispered, "She already knows." For the first time, Leah didn't feel pulled back into the past. The words felt like closure, like the door between forgiveness and distance had finally found its balance. Weeks later, Leah visited the house again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The yard was cleaner, the porch newly painted. Eli greeted her with a hug that felt unforced this time. Inside, the rooms looked the same, but lighter somehow, like the air had learned how to breathe again. Nora was baking, humming softly to a song Leah hadn't heard since childhood. When Mark came into the room, Leah's pulse quickened, but he only nodded, his eyes filled with quiet respect. "Thank you," he said simply. And that was enough. No long apologies, no tears. Just the fragile piece of people who'd finally learned what love cost and what it's worth. Later, Leah walked through the backyard, tracing her steps to the old oak tree where she used to play. She remembered the girl who once dreamed of escaping, the one who thought distance would fix everything. But now she understood, freedom wasn't about leaving. It was about returning when you're ready, without fear, without guilt. She ran her hand along the rough bark, feeling the weight of time beneath her palm. Maybe every family carries a story that hurts, but it's what you do with that pain that decides who you become. Leah smiled to herself, whispering, "I made it through," and for the first time she believed it. As Leah drove home that evening, the sunset painted the road in shades of orange and gold. She rolled down the window, letting the wind carry away the last traces of resentment. The house would always be a part of her story, but it no longer owned her peace. She was done being the savior. Now she was the author. She smiled as the city skyline came into view, the hum of traffic blending with her steady heartbeat. Maybe family wasn't about who needed saving. It was about who learned to stand after the storm. Leah whispered, half to herself, half to the wind, "I did save the house. I just didn't know it was me all along." Months slipped quietly into each other, and Leah found herself in rhythm with her new life. She'd started a small design business from her apartment, something that had once felt like a dream too fragile to say out loud. Clients came, bills were paid, and slowly, her confidence grew from something borrowed into something entirely her own. Yet, sometimes in the quiet evenings, when the city lights flickered through her curtains, she still thought of home, not with pain anymore, but with a strange, gentle gratitude. She'd learned that family didn't need to live under the same roof to be loved. It lived in the lessons, the resilience, the boundaries drawn out of heartbreak. Every time she signed a new contract, every time she smiled without guilt, Leah felt herself rewriting what family meant. She wasn't running from her past now. She was building from it. One Saturday morning, Leah visited Nora at a local farmer's market. The air smelled of baked bread and oranges, laughter weaving between the stalls. Nora looked healthier, lighter. She waved when she saw Leah, her smile unguarded for the first time in years. "You look happy," she said, pressing a paper bag of pastries into Leah's hands. "I learned from you," Leah replied softly. They sat together on a nearby bench, sharing coffee and stories about small things. Neighbors, recipes, plans. It wasn't about apologies anymore. It was about presence. And in that simple, wordless peace, Leah felt something return to her. Trust. Not in her family's perfection, but in their effort. For once, that was enough. Later that week, Eli came by her apartment with a small cardboard box. Inside was a photo album. Old family pictures she'd thought were lost. "Mom found it while cleaning," he said. Leah turned the pages slowly, faces of birthdays, road trips, and quiet mornings staring back. They laughed at the bad haircuts, at Mark's awkward smiles, at how young they all looked before things got complicated. When they reached the last photo, a picture of the house at sunset, Ellie looked at her, eyes soft. "You know, we still call it your house," he said. Leah smiled. "No," she whispered, tracing the image with her finger. "It's just where we all learned the hard stuff." And somehow that felt more true than ownership ever could. One night, Leah received a message from her father. Just a few words. "Thank you for not giving up on us." She stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to reply. The man who once stood behind her fears had finally learned humility. And maybe that was enough. Instead of typing back, Leah saved the message. Not out of sentiment, but as proof that people could change. Even slowly, even painfully. She stood by her window, watching the city below. Every light was a story. Every hum a reminder that life keeps moving, no matter how broken it gets. She whispered to herself, "We all get second chances. Some just take longer to arrive." And for once, she didn't need to be the one giving them. The following morning, Leah went for a walk along the river. The water shimmered in the sunlight, steady and alive. She thought about the journey, the anger, the silence, the reconciliation. None of it had been easy, but it had shaped her into someone new, someone whole. She smiled as a breeze brushed her hair, realizing she didn't owe her family perfection anymore, only honesty and love in whatever form it could still take. The house still stood, miles away, and maybe one day she'd return again, but not to fix it, to visit, to remind herself that every scar in her story had led here, to this quiet morning by the water. For the first time, Leah felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. A year later, Leah stood in front of the White House once more. It looked different now, painted fresh, the garden alive again. Laughter echoing faintly through the open windows. She hadn't planned to come, but Nora had insisted on a small family dinner. "Nothing big," her mother had said. Just a new start. As Leah walked up the familiar path, her chest tightened, not from fear, but from the strange comfort of seeing something survive after everything it had endured. The door opened before she could knock. Eli smiled wide, his face brighter, steadier. "You actually came," he teased. Leah grinned softly. "Yeah, I guess I did." For the first time in years, crossing that threshold didn't feel like surrender. It felt like peace. Dinner was simple. Pasta, garlic bread, laughter that felt a little uncertain at first, but slowly grew easy again. Mark sat across from Leah, quieter than before, hands folded neatly on the table. When their eyes met, he gave a small nod. And that was enough. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was understanding. They talked about everything but the past. About Eli's new job, Nora's garden, Leah's design work. For the first time, conversation didn't circle back to blame or regret. It felt like they were learning how to exist together without breaking the room in half. Leah looked around the table, and for the first time, she didn't see a family trying to survive. She saw one choosing to heal. After dinner, Leah slipped outside to the porch. The night was still, cicadas humming softly in the dark. She leaned against the railing, remembering every version of herself that had stood there before. The angry daughter, the tired provider, the woman who walked away. Now, she was none of those. She was someone who had forgiven, not because they asked her to, but because she wanted to breathe again. Mark joined her after a while, standing beside her in silence. "You were right," he said quietly. "You did build everything we lost." Leah didn't reply. She just looked up at the stars, feeling the years settle gently around them. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a door you opened once. It was something you kept walking through, one quiet night at a time. Before leaving, Nora pressed a small envelope into Leah's hand. Inside was a photo, the house bathed in sunrise, the family standing together in front of it. On the back, Nora had written, "Thank you for giving us another chance." Leah smiled, her throat tightening. You gave yourselves the chance, she said softly. Nora hugged her tightly, the kind of embrace that didn't ask for anything, just gave. As Leah stepped toward her car, she glanced back. The porch light flickered, just as it always had, but instead of sadness, it filled her with warmth. Maybe some lights aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to remind you that imperfection can still glow. Driving home that night, Leah rolled down the windows and let the wind rush through her hair. The road was familiar, yet it felt completely new. Her phone buzzed once. A message from her family group chat, resurrected after all this time. It was simple. Dinner next Sunday? Same place. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Maybe she'd go. Maybe she wouldn't. But knowing she had the choice felt like victory enough. As the city lights appeared in the distance, Leah whispered to herself, some stories don't end. They just learn to begin again. She smiled, feeling the quiet peace of someone who had finally returned home. Not to a house, but to herself. No wish. When your suffer trust in misery to thee, so self